Jane Austen, born in Steventon, Hampshire, England. Jane's parents were respected community members. The family was close, and the children grew up in an environment that stressed learning and creative thinking. When Jane was young, she and her sisters were encouraged to read from their father's library. The children also authored and played in charades. Jane was close to her father and older sister, Cassandra. Jane spent much of her early adulthood helping run the family home, playing piano, and attending church. In 1801, Jane moved to Bath with her father. Then, in 1805, her father died of a short illness. As a result, the family had financial problems and moved from place to place. Pride and Prejudice, written by Jane Austen, was published anonymously in 3 volumes in 1813. Jane Austen was an English novelist known for her plots that often explore the dependence of women in marriage, in the pursuit of economic security and social standing.
Pride and Prejudice is a love story, full of humor in an English Georgian era. Mr. Bennet is a gentleman that lives in Hertfordshire with his wife and his 5 daughters, whom are Jane, Elizabeth, Mary, Kitty, and Lydia. In the Pride and Prejudice, the Bennets are, like Jane Austen herself, members of an educated upper middle class, known as the gentry or the landed gentry. But the family has a problem. If Mr. Bennet dies, their house will be inherited by a cousin whom they have never met. Therefore, the happiness of the family depends on the daughters and if they find good marriages. But suddenly, a rich gentleman, Mr. Bingley, arrives to the neighborhood. Renting a nearby house, Mr. Bingley brings with him his rich but proud friend, Mr. Darcy. Love soon starts arising between Mr. Darcy and Elizabeth. For the sisters, many problems and misunderstandings will arise, including class, gossip, and scandal.
The landed gentry were considered socially eligible to mix with the land-downing aristocracy, but quite a step beneath them in wealth. The landed gentry included military officers and many forms of clergy, all acceptable roles for the educated younger sons of the aristocracy and their descendants. Beneath the gentry were the laboring classes of household servants, tenant farmers, merchants, and tradesmen. For the landowners and the gentry, management of all financial matters was gentlemen's prerogative. By law and by custom, a woman was granted very little control over money, even money that we would today consider her own. A woman of the upper classes could expect to be granted a fortune from her family up on marriage or the death of the father. For woman, beauty, mastery of etiquette, a sharp mind, or a pleasant disposition, a lady could show her gentility through the display of her accomplishments. Set of skills encouraged into young women included drawing, needlework, playing an instrument, or singing well, and mastering languages. A woman was more marriable. Marriage, of course, was the only acceptable role for women. Women like Austen herself became spinsters. They had no formal role in society and were occasionally a burden to their families.
My dear, you flatter me. I certainly have had my share of beauty, but I do not pretend to be anything extraordinary now. When a woman has 5 grown-up daughters, she ought to give over thinking of her own beauty.
In such cases, a woman has not often much beauty to think of.
But my dear, you must indeed go and see Mr. Bingley when he comes into the neighborhood.
It is more than I engage for, I assure you.
But consider your daughters. Only think what an establishment it would be for one of them. Sir William and Lady Lucas are determined to go, merely on that account, for in general, you know, they visit no newcomers. Indeed, you must go, for it will be impossible for us to visit him if you do not.
You are over-scrupulous, surely. I dare say Mr. Bingley will be very glad to see you, and I will send a few lines by you to assure him of my hearty consent to his marrying whoever he chooses of the girls, though I must throw in a good word for my little Lizzie.
I desire you will do no such thing. Lizzie is not a bit better than the other, and I am sure she is not half so handsome as Jane, nor half so good-humored as Lydia, but you are always giving her the preference.
They have none of them much to recommend them. They are silly and ignorant, like other girls, but Lizzie has something more of quickness than her sisters.
Mr. Bennet, how can you abuse your own children in such a way? You take delight in vexing me. You have no compassion for my poor nerves.
You mistake me, my dear. I have a high respect for your nerves. They are my old friends. I have heard you mention them with consideration these last 20 years at least.
Ah, you do not know what I suffer.
But I hope you will get over it and live to see many young men of 4,000 a year come into the neighborhood.
It will be no use to us if 20 such should come, since you will not visit them.
Depend upon it, my dear, that when they are 20, I will visit them all. When is your next ball to be, Lizzie?
Tomorrow fortnight.
Aye, so it is. And Miss Long does not come back till the day before, so it will be impossible for her to introduce him, for she will not know him herself.
Then, my dear, you may have the advantage of your friend and introduce Mr. Bingley to her.
Impossible, Mr. Bennet, impossible. When I am not acquainted with him myself, how can you be so teasing?
I honor your circumspection. A fortnight's acquaintance is certainly very little. One cannot know what a man really is by the end of a fortnight, but if we do not venture, somebody else will. And after all, Mr. Long and her nieces must stand their chance, and therefore, as she will think it an act of kindness, if you decline the office, I will take it on myself.
Nonsense, nonsense. I am sick of Mr. Bingley.
I am sorry to hear that, but why did you not tell me that before? If I had known as much this morning, I certainly would not have called on him. It is very unlucky, but as I have actually paid the visit, we cannot escape the acquaintance now.
How good it was in you, my dear Mr. Bennet, but I knew I should persuade you at last. Come, Darcy, I must have you dance. I hate to see you standing about by yourself in this stupid manner. You had much better dance.
I certainly shall not. You know how I detest it, unless I am particularly acquainted with my partner. At such an assembly as this it would be insupportable. Your sisters are engaged, and there is not another woman in the room whom it would not be a punishment to me to stand up with.
I would not be so fastidious as you are for a kingdom. Upon my honor, I never met with so many pleasant girls in my life as I have this evening, and there are several of them you see uncommonly pretty.
You are dancing with the only handsome girl in the room.
Oh, she is the most beautiful creature I ever beheld. But there is one of her sisters sitting down just behind you, who is very pretty, and I dare say every agreeable. Do let me ask my partner to introduce you.
Which do you mean? She is tolerable, but not handsome enough to tempt me. You had better return to your partner and enjoy her smiles, for you are wasting your time with me.
I really believe Darcy does take care of him in those pans where he most wants care.
What is it you mean?
It is a circumstance which Darcy could not wish to be generally known, because if it were to get around with it, the lady's family, it would be an unpleasant thing.
You may depend upon my not mentioning it.
And remember that I have not much reason for supposing it to be Bingley. What he told me was merely this, that he congratulated himself on having lately saved a friend from the inconsequences of a most imprudent marriage.
In vain I have struggled. I will not do. My feelings will not be repressed. You must allow me to tell you how ardently I admire and love you.
I have never desired your good opinion, and you have certainly bestowed it most unwillingly. I am sorry to have occasioned pain to anyone.
And this is all the reply which I am to have the honor of expecting. I might, perhaps, wish to be informed why, with so little endeavor at civility, I am thus rejected. But it is of small importance.
I have every reason in the world to think ill of you. No motive can excuse the unjust and ungenerous part you acted there.
Lizzie, are you out of your senses to be accepting this man? Have not you always hated him?
Have you any other objection that your belief of my indifference?
Well, my dear, I have no more to say. If this be the case, he deserves you. I could not have parted with you, my Lizzie, to anyone less worthy.
In conclusion, the novel plays with stereotypes in the minor characters. It represents the ideal marriage from a 19th century upper-class perspective, and it also stretches the limits of acceptable masculinity and femininity in the two main characters.